The scripture reading for this morning's lesson will be taken from Philippians, the 4th chapter, verses 10 through 13. Philippians 4, 10 through 13. I'll be reading from the New King James. But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, now that at last your care for me has flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard of need, for I have learned in whatever state I am in to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
Morning, everyone. Thank Tony for reading that scripture reading. To thank my dad for a couple different reasons. He bailed me out this morning. I was on for a sermon tonight, sermon this morning, Bible study, and song leading. I've been working around the clock at the office, and I just wasn't prepared. So I didn't know if my voice would hold up. So I appreciate you taking those, Dad. Also, unwittingly, he gave me the perfect segue into my sermon this morning, because that story he told about Tommy Pickard is essentially what my whole sermon's about this morning. I did ask him to lead that song. That's the title of my sermon this morning, Anywhere is Home. So he did that for me. But also that little story he told is a lot about what we're going to talk about. We read from Philippians chapter 4 an awful lot. And, you know, we put a lot of emphasis on that very last verse. You know, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, or New American Standard says, through him who strengthens me. But that whole passage that Tony just read for us is a lot of different little messages wrapped up in just a few words. You know, essentially it just tells us we're okay. We're okay whether we're wanting, whether we're lacking, you know, whether we have what we think we need, we don't have what we need, we're okay. We're okay because we can do whatever comes at us because of Jesus who strengthens us, right? It tells us not to be satiated, right? It tells us not to be complacent, not to be satisfactory with where you are, not to ever stop striving to do better, to be better, right? But it also tells you to be content, be happy with what you have. There's a lot to that verse. So this morning, at least the ideas that I got were from some conversations that Cody and I had on our trip there last week, 2 weeks ago now, with a lot of the locals. I'm going to do my best to keep this morning short, cheery. You know, some of my lessons aren't always real cheery. Sometimes they're Bible bashers, and you know, today's the anniversary of a really bad day in our history. So I've preached about that lots of times too, and you know, I'm going to try to keep it as upbeat and happy, and it'll be short and sweet. And tonight won't be a part 2, but maybe a little bit of a sequel if you care to come back. So while Cody and I were in Alaska, Cody liked talking to the people on the ship, learn how we went on a cruise as well. You know, learn how they live their lives. Those things are different. But then when we got off the ship, we like talking to lots of people about Alaska. You know, even though it's part of the 50 U.S. states, Alaska is a lot different than the way we live around here. And the people that are up there, and most of the time we know, you know, hey, where are you from? Are you from here, from Alaska? Are you from elsewhere? And pretty much everybody we talked to, nobody was born and raised there in Alaska. Now, that doesn't mean people aren't born and raised there. We were in a little town called we were in Haines. Haines is the town where the people from the Gold Rush series are from. So if you guys have ever watched the Gold Rush series, we were in that little town of Haines. And the lady who was driving us around, we were going on a little excursion on a boat. She was talking about, here's our little town. We've got one store. We've got this. And here's our school. And only 12 people graduate from our school every year. And I'm like, well, this is just like Bellsville. It's not that far off. So, I mean, it was funny. But, you know, there's people that live there, and people say the same thing about where we're from, right? Why does anybody live in this small little town? Nobody lives here, but, you know, it's the same idea. I think there was 800 people in Haines, and it reminded me a lot of Bellsville. So some people are born and raised there and stay there, but a lot of people we talked to came to Alaska from elsewhere, right? And a lot of it didn't have to do with family, right? They just came to Alaska for the adventure, for the fishing, or for the moose hunting. You know, everybody talked about that. That was a big deal up there. That same guy from that excursion in Haines I was talking about was driving the boat. I think he was part of the Coast Guard, was a reason he was up there. But he said his tourism season ends on, I think it's next week, September 14th, because September 15th is opening day of moose season. So that made me laugh. But even though these people the vast majority of them weren't born in Alaska. They weren't from Haines. They weren't from Juneau. They weren't from all these different places. They really did claim Alaska as their home. Even if they didn't live there. A lot of people don't live in Alaska year round. They come back down here in the wintertime because around the winter solstice, it only stays daylight for 3 hours a day. Now, the opposite is true in the summertime. It's daylight for a long time. So it's a nice place to live there. But, it's inhabitable, but it's not an ideal place to live. And even though there are lots of downsides to it, those people still claim Alaska as their home, right? So that kind of got the wheels turning in me, right? So what makes these people content, and what about Alaska is good for them? And is that a good thought to have as a Christian? And, what are the pros? What are the cons? We always kind of view our ideas and thoughts through the Christian lens. And I thought maybe this might make a good little sermon. So let's ask a question this morning, or two questions rather. What is home, right? And where is home? Two pretty straightforward questions. And if I asked everybody in the building, you might have a different answer, right? And if I asked you in a year or two or 3 or 4 from now, you might give me a different answer, and you probably will, because that idea evolves, right? Home is, I don't want to say home is unstable, right? Because that's exactly what we want home to be, the one place of stability in our lifetimes. But home changes, our lives change, things change, people change. So I won't read the scripture reading over again. Thank you again for that, Tony. But Philippians 4, I think, is a good baseline for that question, right? Specifically, for I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I am. The second half of verse 11, right? That's a pretty good baseline for what we want our home to be, what we want our lives to be. Again, home is the center of our lives. At the end of our workday, we go home, right? Whether that's to a place or to people, home is the idea of stability throughout our lives, right? So based off Philippians alone, home doesn't matter, right? Because you're supposed to be happy no matter where you are, what you have. Whether you have a lot, you have a little, you have people, you don't have people, you're supposed to be happy because you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. That's a good thought. I don't think that should be an absolute isolationist definition, right? So let's read from Psalms chapter 91. If you care to follow along, I'm going to be reading from the New American Standard Version. Very few of the verses will be posted behind me. I'll be reading them out loud, and I'll be reading this whole chapter here. Psalms 91. One who dwells in shelter of the Most High will lodge in the shadow of the Almighty. I will say to the Lord, my refuge and my fortress, my God in whom I trust. For it is he who rescues you from the net of the trapper and from the deadly plague, and will cover you in his pinions, and under his wings you will take refuge. His faithfulness is a shield and a wall. You will not be afraid of terror by night, or of the arrow that flies by day, of the plague that stalks in darkness, or the destruction that devastates at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, and 10,000 at your right hand, but it shall not approach you. Verse 8 says, you only look on with your eyes and see the retaliation against the wicked. For you have made the Lord, my refuge, the Most High, your dwelling place. No evil will happen to you, nor will any plague come near your tent. For he will give his angels orders concerning you to protect you in all your ways. On their hands they will lift you up so that you do not strike your foot against a stone. You will walk upon the lion and the cobra. You will trample the young lion and the serpent. Because he has loved me, I will save him. I will set him securely on high because he has known my name. He will call upon me and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. I will satisfy him with a long life and show my salvation. So Psalms adds a little bit to that, right? We are to be content wherever we are with whatever we have. But on top of that, as long as we have God, we're okay. We are shielded. We are protected. That doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen, right? But adding those two passages together, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And also, with God is with me, I am home. I am protected. I am shielded. He is my shield and my wall. That's what it says there in verse 4, right? So no matter what we call home, we are home. As long as we have Christ and God, right? We have salvation through Christ, and we have God to protect us and forgive us and save us in the end. So, just for fun, a little bit of levity, let's go through some of the places that I've called home in my lifetime. Now, I didn't have enough pictures to go clear back to when we lived in Columbus. And Dad did reference Tommy and Angel Pickard, so that would have been a good place to start. But these are some of the places I've called home over the few years. I'll use my magnifying glass. Good job. Good idea, Wes. So, I can get to work. There we go. That's our house up on top of the hill. West Main lives, we lived up there for about 4 years, and then we ended up moving out to my great grandma's farm in Sandy Ridge. This is obviously when I still lived at home with my parents. My mom and dad still live there, 60525. Then that's when I left the house, right? So home for me changed, even though for the rest of my immediate family, it stayed the same. My mom and dad were still there, my younger brothers. We even still had my golden retriever back then. I think we had the new dog now, actually. We had our English Shepherds. My pets, my immediate family, they were still home. So for me, that was home because that's where the people still were. And that's where my bed was and half of my stuff, right? But I still had to move out and home had to change a little bit for me, right? So I went to undergrad. I went to Ohio U. I was there for 2 years, once in the dorm, and then I moved to an apartment. So even what I called home while I was in undergrad changed a little bit, right? The place where I laid down to sleep every night was a little different, but I had some consistency there, right? I had the same roommate for 2 years in a row. Josh was my roommate, for anybody that doesn't know that, right? So even though things are constantly changing, we always try to find these pieces of stability for us to try to help us get along, right? So then it was a big change for me. When I went to optometry school, I moved to a whole different state, and the closest people I knew were as close to me then as they were here now. My aunt and uncle live in Cincinnati, and there was literally the closest people I knew, right? This is not my apartment, but that's a picture of the Indiana Memorial Union. Fortunately, I did find a church there. I had a little bit of a struggle getting in with that church, but there were lots of, solid people there. So even though I didn't have anyone I knew, anybody I already knew was my family, I knew I had family there, right? Because there was some extension of the church at very least, right? It's not the same. It was a big change. It wasn't the foundation of stability that I knew my home to be, but anywhere is home, as long as we know we have Christ and God, right? Moving on from there, I moved to Florida for a little while. I lived in Miami. And that is a picture of the gate around the outside of my house. That place was pretty rough. There was all kinds of commotion going on all day and night because I lived in the ghetto. Quick story. I'll make this one short because I'll tell lots of stories today. We had some kind of function after work. We were out at a restaurant with my friends, and I took an Uber home because parking is $30 for a half hour, if you didn't know, in Miami. So the Uber picked me up. The guy took me, and most of the time they didn't speak English, right? So he was taking me home as an Uber pool. He picked up 2 or 3 different people. They all spoke Spanish, right? Eventually, I was the first one in, last one to get dropped off. He took me back to where I lived in Little Havana. He goes, "Where am I taking you?" I said, "Well, my apartment's over here." And then I'm like, "Oh, should I be nervous? This guy's going to know where I live, whatever." And he goes, "No, I'm not." "Yeah, I need to go home, man. My apartment's right over here." He goes, "You don't live in Little Havana." I said, "Yeah, I do." I said, "I'm one of the few gringos that live here." He said, "No, you're the only gringo that lives here." So that was different for me, right? But it still was home. It's where I laid my head. I made lots of friends down there. It was a piece of my life, right? So even though I didn't expect that to be home, that was home, right? It's what I had to make home. And now my home is, all over the place. When Cody says I'm going home or we're going home, I don't know if she's talking about her mom. She calls my mom, mom. She calls her mom, mom. I don't know what's going on, but it's okay, right? It's all our family, right? Everybody's nearby. Now I have home is my immediate family, right? There's a picture of Cody and Jack. She said he was scruffy, so there's a nice one of him cleaned up. There's Jack. Home is where my family is, right? Now, I don't just want to dwell on that, right? Because the vast majority of us in here are immediate family, but that's not what it's all about, right? Because I'm not excluding any of you that aren't my immediate family, because I consider you my family even more so than some of my immediate family. And I'll elaborate on that here in a couple slides, but let's read a verse first. Psalms chapter 127. Psalms chapter 127. Unless the Lord builds a house, they who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord guards a city, the watchman stays awake in vain. It is futile to you to rise up early, to stay up late, to eat the bread of painful labor. This is how he gives his beloved sheep. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is reward. Like arrows in the hand of the warrior, so the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be ashamed when they speak with their enemies in the gate, right? So let me ask that question again. Who is our family, right? Clearly here, this is talking about nurturing and raising up your own family, but it's talking about raising them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, like we like to quote so frequently, right? So our family, yes, is our flesh and blood, but in this case, more importantly, our family is those who love the Lord, right? So this moves me on to another thing that happened to Cody and I last week. This is a picture of a town called Sitka in Alaska. I've never been there before. I'll save this thought for the end. I've never been there before, and Cody and I didn't have any plans. So we just got off the boat. The city of Sitka paid for shuttle buses or city buses that ran people from the boats downtown, because that's how they get their commerce. They bring people into town. We went into town, walked around, shopped around, got something to eat, looked in all the stores. They're selling fancy furs and, whatever else. One little jewelry store had an advertisement for tanzanite that was cheap. So we go in and look around, and the lady makes a comment about Cody's earrings, right? Those are berry rings, just, trying to sucker her in. And that was it. Then we walked out. We didn't find anything we liked. We didn't want to be around the people. So we just walked right back out, went through the rest of our day. And we got back on the bus. Boat's about to leave. So we're going back to our boat. And right outside the boat, even though there was nothing, they built a big metal building and filled it full of little tiny shops like Gatlinburg, right? Well, there's another jewelry store. I didn't even connect to me that it was the same one. It was just a branch of the same jewelry store. And there's a sign, same thing, tanzanite earrings, $50. They were cheap, right? So we go in, they had a pair left, bottom, we got something. Great, good deal. So we go to check out, and then one lady points out, she's like, "Hey, you're the girl with the berry earrings." I'm like, wow, that's a weird coincidence. She was uptown and now she's here. It was about 5 miles apart. I didn't even realize it was the same chain or store or whatever you want to call it. But hey, that's a funny little coincidence. That lady remembered us from, it was 2 or 3 or 4 hours earlier. We'd been out walking around in the woods looking at salmon and stuff like that. So we buy the earrings. She takes us over to check out, and she makes me fill out a form that has my address on it. I didn't want to give it to her. I'm like, what are you going to do with my address? I'm too far away. It doesn't matter to you. Whatever. I didn't want to fight. Take it, right? Barnesville, Ohio, 381 Morgantown Avenue. And there's an older gentleman right beside. He was working on the computer, and he literally slammed something down and looked at me, and he goes, "You've got to be kidding me." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "My mom's from Temperanceville." And then, so I'm going through my mind, and I knew about this, but it caught me really off guard, right? I knew that I had a cousin in Alaska that worked in a jewelry store, right? And I should have known right then and there that was him. But the way he started talking to me, it got all twisted up. He told me his last name was my family's last name, but I knew he has a different one. And then I went out and called Mom. I'm like, "You'll never believe this. I met a guy named Tom, but it's not the same Tom. It's a different one." She's like, "It's the same one, Zach." So we go back in and we talk to him, and I didn't take a picture. I'm still kicking myself on that. But it just so happens that on the other side of the planet, nearly, one of the furthest places you can get and still be in the country, I met my mom's first cousin in a jewelry store right outside a cruise ship, right? That was wild. It's a small world, like my dad said, and you never know who you're going to run into. You never know what you're going to find, right? But then I'm thinking about that a little bit. And yes, he is my family. I'm as closely related to him as I am Gary Jr., right? Gary's my dad's first cousin. Tom's my mom's first cousin. But is he, really my family? By definition, yes. I've only seen him once in my life. That was at his dad's funeral 10 years ago. That's why I didn't remember him. I was kind of half looking for him, but he didn't look the way I remembered. So I didn't know him from Adam, right? Let's read from Galatians chapter 4 and verse 1. Galatians 4 and verse 1 says, "Now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, although he is the owner of everything, but he is under guardians and managers until the date set by the Father. So we too then, when we were children, were held in bondage under the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of the time came, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons and daughters. Because you are sons, God sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying out, 'Abba, Father.' Therefore, you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, then an heir through God." There we have it. We are all family because we're all sons and daughters of God, right? We're all siblings in that case, right? Even though everybody in this, like I said before, half of us are blood relatives, but even though we're not all blood relatives, I'm closer with you guys than I am with that guy. Even though technically he is my first cousin once removed. That is the second time I've ever met him in my life. First time I've ever spoken to him, right? I have family in Alaska, but he's not my family in the sense of what God's looking at. Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9. "Let's not become discouraged in doing good, for in due time we will reap We do not become weary, so then we will have opportunity. Let's do good to all people, especially to those who are of the household of faith. There we go. Especially to those who are in the household of faith. So again, Gary Jr., right? I'm just as closely related to Tom as I am Gary, but I can tell you all kinds of stories about time I've spent with you, Gary, and all kinds of good times, bad times, all the stuff we've done because Gary's my family, right? More so of the family that I associate, I relate with because of this, because of our church family here, right? He's two-sided, right? And to me, because of the points I'm making here, that's more important than the blood relation that we have. Right. So where is my home? It's not in Sitka, even though I have a little bit of family there. All right. So where is home for me? Right. Let's look at another little story I've got for you. This is a picture from the top of a place called Diamond Head. This is in Honolulu. It's a really tall mountain, kind of on the edge of the water. And in World War II, they had lookouts, and I think they had guns sitting up on top. That concrete plank you see right there, I think they had a big gun sitting on top of that thing, but it overlooks all of the bay over top of Honolulu. Obviously, you can see the big cities and towers, and way back in here, that little spot is Pearl Harbor, believe it or not. Really pretty picture. But what you can't see from right here is there's a Church of Christ right underneath that red arrow, and we went and visited that. I did take a picture of that one, and I can't find it. I would have loved to have showed you guys. Now, this experience was a little different for me. It was different for all of our family, and I'm sure it was different for the members there as well. It's not their fault. It was summer of 2021, smack dab, depending on your opinion, in the middle of COVID. Hawaii laws were insanely strict, even still to this time, because a lot of people hadn't brought it in. They were trying to keep the island quarantined and isolated. Looked different. Everybody was wearing Hawaiian shirts. That was kind of funny. Even the preacher. Structure was roughly the same to what we do here at West Main, except for because of Hawaii law, we had to go outside to sing. We sang a lot of the same songs that we sing here. I recognized them, but we had to go outside and stand on the lawn to sing. And we did. We sang 2 or 3, went inside, did the rest of the service, Lord's Supper, went outside, sang some version of an invitation song. We had to come back in. Was that a little bit different? Yes. Was it something that felt normal to me? For the most part, right? It's the same thing that we do. It felt different. And again, it's not because of their customs or traditions or anything like that. It was the law at the time. They weren't allowed to sing inside. But it was home, right? It was the same structure, same songs, same church, same Bible, same God, same Jesus, right? Different place, different style, different lots of things, but it was home. It was family, right? John chapter 4 and verse 19. John chapter 4 and verse 19. This the verse where Jesus was speaking with the woman who had many husbands. The woman said to him, "Sir, I perceive that you are a great prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, and yet you Jews say that in Jerusalem is the place where one must worship." Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, that a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But a time is coming, even now has arrived, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. For such people, the Father seeks to be his worshipers. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth." The woman said to him, "I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When that one comes, he will declare things to us." Jesus said to her, "I am he, the one speaking to you." It doesn't matter what mountain we're standing on, right? Whether it's Diamond Head or we're standing down there on top of that big hill in Newcastle, right? Jesus made it pretty clear here that the physicality, the customs that they had in the Old Testament of location, of who you're with, what you're doing, that doesn't matter anymore. All that matters is that you're worshiping in spirit and truth, and you worship with those who are worshiping in spirit and truth. So even if you don't know them, right? Even if they're not your family, they're your family. Right? I really didn't know Tom Terry that well. I knew he was my family, right? But I know I can walk into a Church of Christ and there I'll find my family. Let's look at, I got 2 more examples and then the lesson will be yours. Here's my picture of Buckingham Palace in reverence to the Queen. My experience in London, this was an interesting one for me. Very similar to something happened to us in Baltimore a little while back. But anyways, I'll stick with London. So we got there. Thursday, or it was Friday and Saturday had kind of blended together because of the time change, and we knew we had to find a church, right? We kind of map out our week, but the first thing we wanted to do is find a church. I Googled something, found a church, middle of nowhere, couldn't find a picture, didn't know much about it. Their website had been updated sometime within the last 3 months. That's pretty good for a Church of Christ. Most of them don't get in there all the time. So we kind of hedged our bets. We'll go try it out. So we went, we're standing on the street. Did not look like a church. We're standing outside of a service entrance of some kind of apartment building is what it looked like. We stood there and stood there and stood there, and I'll give Jake credit. Cody and I were kind of on the fence. We're like, I don't know about this. And Jake's like, let's just stay until at least 5 minutes after they said they were going to start. And don't you know it, it was either 1 minute before or 1 minute after. I don't remember which. Some guy, exactly what you imagine, jolly little British dude with a hat like Sue's dad wears, comes walking down the street. He had keys, opened up that basement entrance. We went into this little basement room. They opened up a closet and we helped them set out the chairs. It wasn't a church in the way that we understand it or we recognize, and all kinds of people of different backgrounds and ethnicities. That's different, especially for somebody from Barnesville. But service got started. There's that familiarity, right? Same idea, same process. People sound different. They've got different opinions and ideas because they're not from the same place we are. But we get out the songbook. I open up the front page and it said Monroe, Louisiana. That's the same church that the Duck Dynasty guys go to. That's where that songbook came from. And there you go. Halfway across the world, outside of our country this time, someplace completely different. And there's that familiarity again. It's a small world. Like Dad said, the church is a small community. So even though things may look and seem completely different, he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. John 4:24. God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. We just read that one. Colossians 1:3. Colossians 1:3. We give thanks to God the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you, since we heard of your faith in Christ Jesus and love which you have for all the saints, because of the hope reserved for you in heaven, which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel. Verse 6 says, which has come to you just in all the world, also it is bearing fruit and increasing, even as it has been doing in you also since the day you heard it and understood the grace of God in truth. Just as you learned it from Epaphras, the beloved fellow bondservant who is faithful servant of Christ on our behalf, and he also informed us of your love in the Spirit. Verse from Paul there. 2 Timothy, verse 2 and 14. 2 Timothy 2 and 14, remind them of these things and solemnly exhort them in the presence of God not to dispute about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the listeners. Be diligent to present yourself approved to God as a worker who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth. Verse 16 says, but avoid worldly and empty chatter, for it will lead to further ungodliness. And their talk will spread like gangrene, among them Hymenaeus and Philetus, men who have gone astray from the truth, claiming that the resurrection has already taken place and that they are jeopardizing some of the faith. Nevertheless, the firm foundation of God stands, having this seal: the Lord knows those who are his, and everyone who names the name of the Lord to keep away from wickedness. God knows who's part of his family, right? And as mentioned here, assuming we have the full armor of God that we're supposed to have, we're able to identify those who are of the family, of the faith, and those who are not. But don't let that be a discouragement. God's family is all over the globe. They're not easy to find, but they're out there. And like Dad said again, the more you look, the more coincidences you'll find, and you'll find that God's family is a tight-knit community. Last example here. Here's I stole this picture from Pat Gamp. I got to give him credit. That's our profile picture for our YouTube page. If you've never looked, there's the old building with the new building in the background and Jeff big blue van. This happened. I can't tell you where it was. It was a long time ago. I think we were in Charlotte, North Carolina. Could have been in Virginia. But we went to a local church. We were pretty confident in it, very sound. I don't know if they had a good website or what it was, but we were confident. We went normal service, just like going on vacation and going to a conservative Church of Christ. Everything was run of the mill. So afterward, somebody walks up to us and shakes our hand. Hi, how are you? Where are you from? So we're from Barnesville. right? Usually we don't say Barnesville, especially, when I lived in Miami, people asked where I'm from, I would say Pittsburgh. They still didn't know where that was, right? Most of them weren't from the States anyways. And then we were in London. We just said Ohio. We're from Ohio. And they're like, is that close to Tennessee? I'm like, close enough. But when you're talking to somebody from the church, you say Barnesville because people know West Main Street here, right? Then he goes, oh, Barnesville. Don't move. Stay right there. She comes over and she brings this guy, and I didn't really see his face. It was almost like she backed him up and turned him around to us. But he stood right there, and it was Roxanne. Like, what in the world? He had a full beard. Like, he's like, yeah, my sister lives in Barnesville. So of all people, of all places, I don't know if she was married to Wes at the time, Roxanne Wilson. I met her brother. He said, yeah, she looks like me, but with more facial hair. He was pretty funny. It's a small world, small, tight-knit community, right? And our family has family. Family of family is family, right? Be encouraged by the thought that the Lord's church is still strong. We constantly talk about how our society is going down and nobody cares about God. And for instance, after I was listening to the news the other day, and when the press secretary heard about the passing of the Queen, she didn't say our thoughts and prayers are with the Queen and the people of England. She said our thoughts and our hearts are with the people of England, right? So small stuff like that. They're constantly trying to carve God out of the community. And that's all we see, and that's all we dwell on, and it's depressing, and it makes us feel isolated, right? But know that the church is still strong. The church is still out there. Now it's on us to keep it going, right? It only takes one generation to break the chain. So it's my duty as much as anyone else is here to keep the church strong. But God is still with us, right? Anywhere is home as long as we're with God. The church is still strong. Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. We'll talk about the Israelites a little bit, and then the lesson will be yours. Exodus 13 and verse 17. Now when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near, for God said the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. Therefore, God led the people by the way of the wilderness to the Red Sea. And the sons of Israel went up into the battle formation from the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, and he had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will certainly take care of you, and you shall carry my bones from here with you. That would be Joseph speaking. Then when they set out from Succoth and camped in Etham, the edge of the wilderness, and the Lord was going before them in a pillar of cloud by day to lead them on their way, and a pillar of fire by night to give them light, so that they might travel by day and by night. He did not take away the pillar of cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from the presence of the people. And we don't have that anymore. It would be very inspiring to say, there's God. He's with us. Follow that big ring of fire. That's pretty scary. And I always remember thinking that as a little kid, following this big tornado of fire, essentially. But think about the wisdom in that, right? They're walking through the desert, the wilderness at nighttime. It's pretty cold. It's pretty dark. There's a big ring of fire to keep everybody warm, to keep everybody able to see. God was clearly with them, right? God delivered them out of Egypt. The place that they just called their home wasn't much of a home, right? You can look at the way the Israelites were treated in Egypt, and you can give me your own opinion on that. But the home they had wasn't the home they wanted, right? The home they wanted was with God, right? And he pulled them out of that. As my grandpa always says, God doesn't care where you are. He loves you enough to come get you where you are, but he loves you too much to leave you where he found you. Right? That's pretty clear with the Israelites. He loved them enough to deliver them out of there. He brought them to Egypt in the first place for their own good. They were going to starve to death. They stayed there, and then Egypt became a bad place, so he pulled them right back out. God was with them the whole time. Anywhere is home. John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life. Without God, you're homeless. Not only are you homeless, but you're familyless, right? Even if you're unfortunate enough to have lost your family, your friends, you have a family as long as you're with those that love God. Tonight, I'm going to expand upon this idea of who is our family. We've talked a lot about that this morning, about casting aspersions and judgments and who is evil and what is evil and things like that. So if you care to return, please do. But for now, like I said at the beginning, I wanted to keep this lesson cheery, right? I wanted to stay happy. Anywhere is home. This is our family. So sorry, I didn't put the book on this one. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house this is John chapter 14. Do not let your heart be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If that were not so, I would have told you, because I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'm coming again and will take you to myself, so that where I am, there you will be also. And you know the way where I am going. Thomas said to him, Lord, we do not know where you're going. How do we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. There we have it. We have a home prepared for us, right? Even if you are homeless in this life, you're not familyless, you're not homeless. We have a home prepared for us. And a while back, I mentioned this in a Lord's Supper I did a little while ago, but somebody made mention on the internet that we can see what God and Jesus made in the 7 days that it took him to prepare the world for us. God's still preparing that home for you in heaven. He's been working on it for a long time and an awful lot more than 7 days. We've seen what he can do here. Imagine what he's doing for us in the next life. That's the home that we're all working for. And with that, I leave you with today's lesson. If you've not given your life to Jesus in baptism and named yourself a member of his family, a member of the church, he's not preparing a home for you. I'm sorry to say it. But it's as easy as that. Give your life to Jesus in baptism. Do your best to live faithfully. The family here will help you. That's why we have family. That's why we're here. Please give your life to Jesus in baptism if you have. For any who may have brought reproach upon the church or have active sin in their life, same thing. We have family here to help each other. We don't want sin in our lives because we all want to get to heaven. We all want to get to that next home. Thank you for your listening this morning. I hope you're able to take something from that. If you're one of those two categories, please come forward, have a seat in the front row while we stand and sing.